Buenas tardes. Thank you and good night. That's it. Thank you for coming. Who has never been to our little chats before? Any first times? Yay! Raise your brave hands. That's a brave hand. Brave hand. Thank you. And to your friends who dragged you here screaming or bribed you, thank you. Thank you. This is not a lecture, I hope. This is a short chat about the program you're about to enjoy as played by the Santa Barbara Symphony. And I'm going to have to speed skate through a lot of this because there are 4 composers and lots to know, or lots to learn. And this is, again, not a lecture. This is just to enhance your enjoyment, hopefully, of the program. And you can interrupt me with questions at any time relating to the program itself or anything musicological if you dare. Okay? The veterans know it's typically fun. So, 4 composers. Your program will have them in the correct order. I've been talking about them for days in the wrong order, so you'll help correct me. The first composer is who? De Falla, right. The El Amor Brujo is a ballet written in 1915 by Mr. De Falla, and that's all the information you get on that. First, you need background to understand why it's important. There was no native, authentic orchestral tradition in Spain going into the 19th century. By the end of the 19th century, they had adopted and adapted a French tradition of orchestral virtuosity based on the works of the resistance movement, if you will, in France in the mid to late 19th century, starting around 1850, 1860, 70s, going into the 20th century. There was a tremendous resistance against the tsunami of influence that swamped all of Europe, orchestrally speaking, that tsunami being the person of Richard Wagner. Wagner made the orchestra into a deep, throbbing, meaningful, prophetic, symbolic organ that told epic stories and delineated emotions that you didn't even knew you had, in the case of Tristan and Isolde, for example, and set quite consciously a philosophical movement as well as musical, operatic, and dramatic art, aiming at creating a synthetic work, a synthesis of music for the future, a very large and important and overwhelming enterprise. In France, beginning in the 1840s, when he showed up in France, he had a love-hate relationship. This is the deep background of Spain. Spanish music is Germany and France. Spain was a backwater. They're not even connected, really, actually, due to their own particular history. More on that later. But Wagner swamped France over time with a handful of performances of his works, but mostly through his writings. He became this intellectual, again, tsunami. And people even came up with a religion, if you will. It's called Le Wagnerisme, where his theories about society, about the future, about men and women, about Jesus of Nazareth, his stories, his view became the leading burning topic among the intelligentsia of all Europe, not just France. Well, naturally, as with all movements, there was a counter-movement over time as the French were swamped and lost in this wave of influence. They began to search for their own authentic French roots that had nothing to do with the Wizard of Bayreuth. So they reached back to their own culture, the courts of Louis XIV, etc., and the harpsichordists, Couperin, Ramón, Dequin, that music. And they began to cherish and bring forth works that glorified clarity, elegance, humor, things that are lacking often in a Wagnerian drama. When's the last time you laughed at a Wagner opera? No. Anyways, so the French come up with their own, essentially, resistance to this, and over time it develops into their own conservatories where they have their own ethos and mellows contrary to Wagner. And they treat the orchestra not like a huge unified organ that's going to give you deep messages. They give you an orchestra that they can subdivide and actually make transparent and make it elegant and light and entertaining the way music used to be before Wagner, very like Mozart's music, like Haydn's music out in Austria and Germany, but more like Lully, Couperin, again, the French antecedents to the late 19th century composers. That's how they develop the French sound that becomes enucleated in the works of Ravel and Debussy. This new sound is what was imbued to the visiting Spanish composers who came to Paris to learn how to write for orchestra, how to write symphonic music. They didn't go to Bayreuth for this. If you wanted to learn how to write Wagnerian opera, you went there. But if you wanted to learn how to write French music with a Spanish accent, you went to Paris. Our friend Manuel de Falla went there, stayed 7 years, and when he returned, he was already 40 when he arrived, if I recall that. He got to know Debussy, Ravel, Dukas, all the others, the professors, and came back absolutely trained how to write for orchestra in the French manner. That's why his scores are pellucid, clear, elegant, precise. There's no swamps and marshes of sound. Everything is precisely in its place. And that is what you're going to hear today in his score, the suite from El Amor Brujo. Briefly, in Spanish, El Amor Brujo is translated in your programs as Love the Magician. That's lame. In Spanish, brujo, magician, is mago. That's a different word. Brujo really means more like sorcerer, or deeper, warlock. Ooh. The story, briefly, because it's fun, is that there's a young woman who has feelings for a young man. Imagine that. Boy meets girl. But the young woman is haunted by the ghost of an old lover who is possessive, jealous, and Spanish, who is not going to let her go even though he's dead. Ever had one of those boyfriends? Right? No, coño hombre, you're mine forever. That's the Spanish accent you're going to get all day today. So, our heroine is at odds because every time she tries to kiss and make the perfect kiss of devotion with her beloved, new intended young man, she is thwarted by the nasty warlock ghost of her old lover. In other words, baggage. So the boyfriend, the would-be boyfriend, shows up one day with an idea. Yo no sé qué hacer. Vamos a llevar aquí una bonita otra muchacha. Shows up with another beautiful girl to distract the ghost. And so he brings in number 2, he moves in on number 1, and they're able to the kiss of perfect devotion. And when they kiss, el brujo evaporates. Yay! That's the entire plot to El Amor Brujo. Any questions? Okay, we got to move forward then. Next piece, Rodrigo. Rodrigo also, much later, he was born in 1901. He died in 1999. He went and studied in Paris as well. He met Ravel and Debussy, etc. In 1939, he was commissioned to write the guitar concerto, the Concerto de Aranjuez, or Aranjuez. He did a remarkable thing. Because of his excellent training in orchestral texturing by the hands of his French masters, or maîtres, he wrote a guitar concerto in the modern era where the instrument itself is not swamped by the Wagnerian potential of the orchestra. Modern orchestras can easily swamp a small voiced instrument like the guitar. Not all instruments can project well. Harpsichords can't, harps cannot. The flute in its low range, you can barely hear it, etc. These are orchestrational points. And the guitar is not a very loud instrument. It's an intimate chamber music instrument. But you put it in front of an orchestra, to be able to hear it through the textures and with the textures of the orchestra takes skill. And this was one of the glories of the French school: transparency, elegance, and precision, where the guitar is not threatened by the horns and the percussion, etc. So this piece, when it premiered in 1940, became an instant classic and has never left the repertoire. It's easily the most prominent, most important guitar concerto of the modern era. There are other guitar concertos from the Baroque era when the other instruments were not equal, but weaker. And also there are smaller ensembles. That's why you have guitar concertos by Vivaldi, for example, and others. Boccherini comes to mind. Any questions? Okay, well, it's essentially, where did he write it? In Spain. Where in Spain, I couldn't tell you. At his house. Yeah, at a desk. Interesting thing about Joaquin Rodrigo, he was blind from the age of 3 from diphtheria, and yet was a virtuoso pianist who actually recorded much of his piano music. He wrote lots and lots and lots and lots of music. The Concerto de Aranjuez is his big hit. It's the one that overshadows all his other work. In the 1960s, he was still in good enough shape to record a couple of albums worth of his piano music. And he also married a Turkish pianist who became his secretary and all-around amanuensis. Okay, next composer. Who? Bizet. What's a French composer doing in a Spanish program? Duh, he's very busy. Thank you very much. He's very busy. It's Bizet, not busy. Bizet. There's my replacement if I ever get sick. So, Bizet wrote the most important Spanish opera in the history of opera, Carmen. Of course, it's in French. The story is Spanish, set in Spain, etc. But the music is one of the prime examples of what I was discussing earlier, the masterful handling of not only orchestra, but voices and choruses that give a new color, a new vibrancy, a new unbelievably refreshing sound compared to what came from the hands of the great Wagner and his acolytes. By the way, small note, there were other counter influences in this history. 1855 to 1857, for a 2-year period, there was a young German composer who came to Spain to teach Wagnerism, le Wagnerisme, to Spanish composers in Catalonia. Does anyone know who he was? He himself wrote Wagnerian opera. His big hit was Hansel and Gretel. Engelbert Humperdinck. You thought it was that guy from Las Vegas? That's a borrowed name. Engelbert Humperdinck carried the gospel of Wagner to Spain. Not just the French were involved, and had some impact, not as deep as the Parisian professors did, but it's good to know that everybody was trying their hand at influencing Spain. So that's a small note. And you can win $1 at the water cooler with that. Engelbert Humperdinck went to Spain. Okay. We got off track. Oh, Bizet. So the piece you're going to hear is a suite from the incidental music to a play by Alphonse Daudet called The Girl from Arles, or La Arzilienne, I can't pronounce it. La Arzilienne, that one. It's in your program. The Girl from Arles. It's a play. It's a lousy play. The play had 21 performances before they closed it. But the sections of music that Bizet wrote are immortal. Even as the play was on its ultimate dwindle, musicians and music lovers and play lovers came and noticed what excellent music this is for such a mediocre play. And Bizet took advice from his friends and concocted a 4-movement suite of the music. That's number one. A friend of his, after Bizet died, he died only 3 years later after, this is in 1872, he died in 75. A friend of his, Giraud, concocted or put together another suite, the second suite, which is what you're going to hear today, borrowing from other works of Bizet to fill out the texture. He reorchestrated some numbers from earlier operas. So Bizet wrote more than Carmen. He had various other operas that didn't make the boards as well as Carmen ever did. And so that music was borrowed to put into the second suite from The Girl from Arles. Any questions? Am I speaking French? Qu'est-ce que c'est le problème? Étudiez-moi. No, wait. Écoutez-moi. No. I could stand here all day. All right, no more questions. All right, last composer, we're going to get to the good stuff. And this is the good stuff, because we have a big special surprise for you. The last composer, Itzhak Albéniz, I don't know why there isn't an opera based on his life. It's a crazy story of a virtuoso kid born in Catalonia, he was a Catalan, who at the age of 4 gave his first piano recital. At the age of 6, he was taken to Paris to study with Marmontel and the other fabulous professors of piano at the Conservatoire. By the age of 10, he ran away from home and gave concerts and earned a lot of money. I'm not making this up. Look it up. Itzhak Albéniz. He was dragged home by his dad, who had other ideas. He ran away again. And he was writing music, by the way, from a tender age. At the age of 12, he ran away. This time he got stowaway on a boat going to South America at the age of 12. There was a piano on board. Somebody heard him play. The people who were also on the passage opened their purses, their pockets, and they put a fund together for the kid. When he arrived in Buenos Aires, he gave concerts and made a pile of money. He took this money and went on tour to North America. He gave concerts in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, the Eastern Seaboard. Ended up in Cuba at the age of 13 and a half, I think he was, 14. His father, unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to the father was an officer in the embassy, whatever. He becomes an attaché to the embassy in Cuba, shows up to his gig in Cuba. A friend says, hey man, there's this really hot kid playing lots of mean piano. You want to go hear this guy? He's got the same name as you. You don't say. What's his first name? Itzhak? That's my son! Catches his boy, they go back to Europe. By the age of 23, this is now 1883, he was born in 1860, he had a short life, cut short by Bright's disease. He only lived 49 years. In those 49 years, he ends up married at 23, has 3 children, starts to slow down the piano playing career. He runs into a banker in London by the name of Francis, and this is no joke, Money / Coutts. C-O-U-T-T-S, Coutts. Money is his last name. He's a banker, he's wealthy, he's English, and he thinks he's a writer. Oh dear boy, Albéniz, tell you what, I have money. I'll take care of you for the rest of your natural life. All you have to do is write opera. Here, I happen to have 3 libretti of my own device. He had written operas on page, and he was looking for a composer to write the music. The operas were based on the Arthurian cycles. Merlin, Lancelot, Guinevere, King Arthur. This Spanish composer had no relationship whatsoever to this, but he signed the contract and ended up writing an opera called Merlin. He wrote half of Lancelot and never got around to Guinevere, thank goodness. He was not writing his best music by any means. He was writing tons and tons of salon music and operas on a cheesy, mediocre banker's libretti, and it went nowhere. The banker, out of sympathy for his co-worker, came up with a libretto for an opera of a Spanish story called Pepita Jimenez. It had a little more local color, And Albéniz, being the proud Catalan, wrote the music, and actually it was a hit. It was an okay opera. It was played in Brussels and Paris and London. He got around. Then he went back to Spain to settle down and do something else, and that's when he became finally Spanish. He encountered a man by the name of Felipe Pedrell, who was a scholar and an absolute Iberophile. Iberophile? Yeah. He turned everyone to religion about being Spanish. He was a musician himself, and he taught musicians to have pride, like the French did in their background. Have pride in the roots of our culture, the Andalusian, the gypsies, the flamenco, all of it, and have that imbue your music. No more cosmopolitan visiting cards. Write the music that is in your blood. And in the last years of his life, he died in, again, 1909. From 1906 to 1909, he published 4 books of piano music called Iberia, which are the high point of his creative life. Unspeakably difficult piano music, and yet a new synthesis that laid the tracks for other later composers to follow in his unbelievable footsteps. Any questions? But wait, there's more. The piece that you're going to hear today is not by Albéniz. He didn't write well or much for the orchestra. It's by a man named Patrick Russ, who is right here. Patrick Russ is a professional orchestrator from LA and Santa Barbara, and he took 6 pieces by Albéniz and orchestrated them. We hear 3 of them today, and the rest is yours.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I was a student here. I lived here for 7 years and have spent the rest of my life trying to afford to come back. It's a beautiful city, and I'm so thrilled that tonight the Santa Barbara Symphony and Nir and Pablo are premiering these pieces. We chose 3 of them because all 6 would be a concerto length, which is really, poor Pablo, his hands would fall off. If you can imagine, he's playing the Araïza the first half, and then these other pieces the second half, and encores. So I think it was as much as we could do. The pieces themselves are based on, it's idiosyncratic and it's very personal. I went to Spain when I was 20 for the first time abroad anywhere, and I didn't know anything about travel. I was fortunate I actually got a passport before I left, because that would have been really bad. So on the plane, I was nervous about traveling alone. I was going to go to a master class in Santiago de Compostela up north, and also buy a guitar in Madrid. So I board the plane, I'm on my own, and I look around, and there's 11 people I know. I thought, this is unbelievable. They were all students going on the exchange program from UCSB to Madrid. And they said, well, stay with us. I said, great. So the first night we were there, it's an amazing place at the university. And I remember walking into the music hall, and there was no one there, I thought. I opened the door, and there's a pianist rehearsing on Sevilla, the piano piece by Albéniz. And it's brilliant, and it's just wonderful. And every city afterwards, someone was playing Albéniz. It was almost like he was following me. It was the oddest thing. I remember we went that evening to, this is the time of General Franco. You probably don't remember this, but it was very safe to walk the streets of Spain late at night, totally abandoned. It didn't matter. The police had submachine guns, so really people didn't mess around. No, well, that's probably true. So, but I remember we went one evening to a hidden door. I was just walking with the locals, and they knocked, and you open it up, and there was 200 to 300 people in this bar with flamenco and beer, and somebody banging out Albéniz on the piano. And when I went up north to Santiago, I remember there was someone that I never even knew who it was. I walked through the cathedral, and I could hear Cordoba in the distance through the cloisters. And those were my musical postcards of Spain. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun sometime to set those for guitar and orchestra, which surprisingly has rarely been attempted. So tonight, the orchestra is going to be premiering 3 of those, and it's been an absolute delight to go through the rehearsals with Nir and Pablo. And I thank you all for coming, because it's a very special day for me. So,
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick Ross, a living composer and orchestrator. We don't get many. Any questions?